Hi, welcome back to Anxiety Master. Today, I want to talk with you about how we can create emotional calm and safety in situations that might be leaving us feeling overwhelmed. Specifically, we're going to talk about how we can move on from relationships because, well, this is a circumstance which, at least for most of us, will be something that we encounter, if not several times in life, certainly at least once. Now, when we think about a relationship, what we're talking about is an investment that we put into something with someone else. It's a partnership, isn't it? So we contribute a large part of ourselves. And in a way, when we think of any kind of investment, we're always checking to see if the return that we receive is commensurate with what we put in. There has to be some kind of equality there, doesn't there? And so over time, if we find that what we're putting into a relationship and what we're getting out don't seem to be equal, they don't seem to be fair, we might get to a point where we think it's time to move on. But of course, it's not that easy, is it? Because we get emotionally involved with someone. Maybe our friends and family are involved, or we share a social circle. And so trying to disentangle all of these different wires and move forward with calm and assurance can be really, really complicated. That's something I want us to cover today, is a framework for how we can create emotional calm and safety, specifically in the context of a relationship, so we can move forward with some stability and assurance. This framework applies to any emotional situation that might be leaving you feeling distressed or under pressure. So let's dive in. First, we'll just talk very briefly about what stress actually is, just as a quick review. So stress is essentially when the demands we face outweigh our resources to cope. And of course, the end of a relationship is going to introduce a range of different demands. And in many respects, our partner may have been one of our main resources. So in these circumstances, we can see how the demands we face in moving on from a relationship may appear to be outweighing our resources to cope. And then, of course, stress is cumulative, which means that it builds up over time. So let's say we've got something going on at work which is causing us a problem, or at school or at college, and then we've got issues with our friends or our family. And then on top of that, something happens with our partner, and perhaps it's been building over time. And this stress, if left unaddressed, can then result in chronic or excess pressures in life where essentially we can feel like we're operating just below capacity all the time. It's not a good place to be, so we want to do all we can to try and reduce that back down, bring those pressures down as much as we can. And as those pressures come down, then our capacity to see things helpfully and clearly can start to expand again. This is really where we come to this third point here, which is that it's not events themselves, but rather our responses to events that cause us stress. Now, this is so important to understand. Perhaps you've had a circumstance in which you've been getting really upset about something, and someone comes up to you and says, "Well, I don't know what you're getting so stressed about." And in those moments, we can feel so misunderstood. It can be really, well, it can be quite distressing, can't it? Because really, someone else's perception of what's difficult or challenging for them is going to be very, very different from ours. So something that's easy for us might be hard for them, and vice versa. But regardless, this fundamental principle of it's not events themselves that generate the stress, it's rather our response to them. So we're going to talk about how we can change our response to the transition of moving on from a relationship. And of course, there are different stresses that we encounter in life. It's not just relationships, it might be work, parenting, problems with health, even global events that can sometimes feel so out of control, they leave us feeling a little bit helpless. So before we get specifically to relationships, it's worth just thinking a little bit about the different styles of coping that we might have in difficult situations. Now, essentially, we've got passive coping, which is where we react to a situation, but we don't really take ourselves forward. And then we have active coping, which is what we're going to focus upon today, which is how we can essentially separate the different parts of a situation out so that we can allow ourselves to try and move forward. So let's have a quick look firstly at what passive coping may entail for someone. So let's imagine we're coming to the end of a relationship. Well, we might fall into bad habits, we might fall into time wasting, we might fall into not seeking help, thinking that we have to go it alone. We might fall into destructive thinking, I'm always going to be on my own, it's never going to change. And we might fall into complaining and blaming. It's very understandable. These are just like distress signals that we're really kind of shooting out to the environment to try and, well, we're looking for help, aren't we? It's like an SOS, really. Then equally, we have active coping, which is where we think about how can I solve the problem that I have in front of me? Maybe I need to seek new information. Maybe there's something I don't know that's holding me back from seeing this in a helpful light. Maybe I can get support from friends and family. Maybe I need to get out of this environment for a while in order to see things differently. Maybe I need to update my ideas and expectations about what I can expect in a relationship, for instance. And how can I reframe this experience so that I can see it as something meaningful and helpful? As difficult as it is right now, in the longer course of life, how could this actually be something of meaning to me? So, this is a really useful model that we can use when we think about how to deal with distress, and we're going to be looking at this from a relationship perspective. What we want to do is we want to separate the different components of the situation so that we can focus upon the parts that we have control of, the parts that we can influence, and then also a way to identify and acknowledge our concerns. These are the what-ifs. They're kind of the concerns that we have about the future, and we need to find a way of forming a different relationship with these what-ifs. Let's have a look at maybe what these 3 different intersections may entail. So we're looking at the context of a relationship breakdown. Perhaps you've been with someone for a while and you've been thinking about moving on, but you didn't know how to. Or perhaps it's just been building up and you come to a point where you just can't take any more. Or maybe you've stayed in a situation for longer than you should have done, but there were other circumstances that kept you in there. Maybe you cohabited with someone. Well, how do we separate our things out? Or maybe your parents encourage you to stay with that person, or you worry about how your friends might respond. There are so many different factors, aren't there, which can kind of keep us bound to situations beyond their usefulness to us. So how can we start to take control in this situation? Well, this is really where we want to stay as much as possible. We want to stay in the zone of our direct choices, because these are the things that we can actively have an impact over. So we might decide, okay, how do I need to set and maintain boundaries with my ex-partner? What does that look like? Because perhaps then coming back into my life, whether it's messages or coming into contact with them on social media, for instance, this is a toxic environment for me. It leaves me feeling upset and takes me back to an emotional space I don't want to be in. So how can you create boundaries? The first question. Then you want to think about social media use and how much you engage with mutual friends as well. At least temporarily, there are certain environments that are constant reminders of things from the past, and we can't avoid those, but equally, they might not be useful to keep coming into contact with right now. So you want to have a think about how you choose to interact with social media and also mutual friends. And also, it's very important as well to think about the kinds of hobbies and interests that you had before a relationship. Now, sometimes we carry on our hobbies and interests throughout a relationship, but sometimes we forget about them and we let them go as the relationship becomes our priority. But it's really important to think about how you can start to recraft your sense of personal identity. So come back to the things that you care about, come back to the things that you love. And then you might want to think about, well, when do you want to start dating again? Now, this may not be, and it probably shouldn't be, the initial question to be asking, but it's important to have that sense that there is a future and you have got those kinds of choices and decisions in front of you, because things will get better again. We want to think about who we can seek support from, and we want people to be with us who can listen and who can understand and who can sympathise. We might not be looking for lots of advice from people. The truth is, it's often the case that friends or family will fall into the habit of giving their advice upon things, but actually, and you might recognise this for yourself in certain circumstances. I know I can for me. I can find myself, or I can see other people falling into the role of wanting to be the helper, but it might not be the help that we need in this situation, So we have to think very carefully, who can I have in my environment who's going to be there for me in a way that's meaningful for me, as opposed to wanting to play the role of helper that's meaningful to them. And it's quite a different experience. And then lastly, to focus upon self-compassion and kindness. And this really refers to the idea that if you think of a friend who's in similar circumstances, well, how would you respond to them? How would you reach out to try and help them? And then to think about how you can extend that kind of warm-heartedness to yourself. That's really what self-compassion is. And then next, we come on to the intersection between the things that we can control and the things that we're worried about. And this intersection is our zone of influence. So these are the things that we can't directly control, but we can have some degree of influence over the direction of which they take. So for instance, these may include, well, we can communicate our needs to our friends and family. So of course we can't direct how they respond, but we can decide to communicate what we need. We can engage in activities that are going to foster our growth. So to come back to things which are important to us and which give us that sense that there's life outside the confines of a difficult situation that we're trying to move on from. We can be open with others about our experience, and maybe we can share over time how we've come through a situation. Sometimes sharing with other people and talking about the experience and the difficulties that we've encountered can really remind us of how much we've grown through hard times. And also we can have a degree of influence over the overall atmosphere of the post-breakup relationship with our partner. So for instance, specifically if there are children involved, it's so important that we keep things civil and that we keep things respectful and regulated, and we don't fall back into old patterns, because really now the main focus for you, and this is so important, the main focus is directing your energy on moving forward slowly, modestly, calmly, in order to create, well, a new sense of life for yourself. And then we move on to a really important part of our emotional landscape, which is the emotional concerns. Now, this is in emotional situations where most of us get a little bit bound up, because by design, we all have these things that we're worried about that haven't yet happened. So we might be thinking, well, what if I never find someone I love again? Or what if I never feel better again? And we can't deny these feelings because, well, they exist, but we have to find a different way of having a relationship with them. So let's look at some typical concerns that we might have as we move on from a relationship. And then we're going to ask 3 questions to help us formulate a new relationship with some of these concerns. So the first concern we might have is, well, how will the breakup affect mutual friends and family? Perhaps we're worried about people taking sides, or we're worried about the emotional impact upon people we care about. We might worry about our ex-partner's well-being or how they're going to cope. Now, typically, if we've been in a relationship with someone where we've adopted a carer role, maybe that's even kept us in a situation for longer than we should have stayed because we were worried about how that person would cope with being on their own. And of course, just because we've come to the end of a relationship, it doesn't mean that that concern is going to just naturally dissipate on its own. In fact, if anything, it might even exacerbate, it might even grow stronger, at least in the initial stages of breakup. Then we might have anxiety about the future, our prospects of being single, or how we'll fare when it comes to going into a new relationship, for instance. We might be worried about the opinions of others. Maybe there are rumours, or people are kind of saying things. We're worried about what people might be saying behind our back. It's not uncommon, is it, that other people, if they don't have much going on in their own life, they'll look to the kind of, the juicy news of other people's to try and make their own daily lives a little bit more interesting. We might worry about how quickly we'll recover. This is very, very common. It's almost as if when we have an injury, we have to kind of heal from that injury. But emotional injuries, well, it's something we can't see. So the healing isn't visible. So it might be something that we worry about whether it's actually taking place and how long it will take. And then this is a very common concern, is we might wonder, what will happen if I fall back under that person's influence again? Perhaps they ask to see us or to meet for a coffee, or they send us a bunch of flowers, or they want to apologise, and we start thinking, oh God, I don't want to fall under that spell again. But if you've had experience of that happening in the past, especially if that person turns around and shows a degree of kindness that reminds you of the good person that they can be, you might worry about falling back into that as well. So we need some better questions to help us manage and acknowledge, but ultimately to formulate a different relationship with some of these emotional concerns. Let's have a look at what they may be. So to mitigate these concerns, well, what do I need to trust? What do I need to accept? And how might I need to move on? So what do I need to trust? Well, maybe you need to trust that you've got the personal resilience, that grit and bounceability to come through this situation. No doubt you've come through hard times in life before, and you can trust yourself and remind yourself of those experiences to know that you'll come through this again as well. We may need to trust in the process of healing. It's something that takes time, but it's invariably something that always takes place. And we just need to know that, almost like growing taller as a child, you don't notice your own growth. It's only when someone bigger than you hasn't seen you for a while and they say, oh, look how much you've grown, do you actually notice how much that you've developed. We need to trust that process of healing. We need to trust that process of growing. We need to trust that the people that matter are going to be there for us because, well, ultimately, the people who we care about the most and the people who love us the most will be there for us regardless of difficult times. In fact, this is often, we have fair weather friends, don't we? People who are there for us when times are good, but then we really find out who our friends are when times are tough. And we have to know that we're going to be happy again, because if you've experienced happiness before, you can certainly find that again. The idea of happiness will change for you, at least temporarily. Perhaps it will be the happiness of knowing that you can stand on your own 2 feet without needing someone else to rely upon. That's going to be the thing that gives you that sense of deep and solid conviction inside. And then next, we come to the things that we need to accept. So what do I need to accept in these circumstances? Well, others have their own opinions, and that some friendships may change. Some people are just fair weather friends. Some people have their own ideas about how we should manage our own circumstances. But, the people that really matter will always be there for us regardless, and we have to trust that. We have to really trust that process and accept that some people will go, but the people that matter will be there to stay. We have to accept that it's okay to feel a range of emotions. We don't want to be pushing emotions down, pretending they don't exist. Emotions are just messages. They're reminders that we're alive, and we're going to experience a range of them as we go through the transition away from a relationship. And we have to accept as well that there may be some questions that remain unanswered. These emotional circumstances are very, very complicated, and they bring up all sorts of things for all kinds of people, and we won't necessarily get to the bottom of every aspect of each situation, but neither do we need to. We only need to take the parts out of a situation that are right for us and our own learning. This is what really matters. And then how might I need to move on? Well, I might need to let go of the hope of reconciliation. Maybe it's really time to move on and expand your wings beyond the confines of this relationship. You may need to move through some resentments that you have towards your partner, not because they're necessarily worthy of forgiveness, but because you want to create space to have new experiences. You might need to move on to know that you can expect something better and also to invest in future hopes, because there's one thing for certain: through all the difficulties that you'll have encountered in deciding to come through this relationship and to move on from it, is that you would have grown into a stronger person. You might not recognize that right now, but that will come to the fore over time. And with that, you can expect to have better experiences in the future because, well, you deserve it. So there we go, these 3 zones: the zone of control, zone of influence, and the zone of concern. And as I said, when it comes to these concerns, we just want to think about, well, what do I need to accept? What do I need to trust? How do I need to move on? So there's a support resource today just to remind you of this process, which you can download. The link should be in the description. And there's also a listening I've created for you. So just a quick reminder, this video is part of a week-long program, which is there to help you reduce stress for calm and confidence. And I really hope you found this useful. Whatever you've got going on right now, know that you will come through it. I'm here for you as well. If you have any questions, you can always get in touch with me at the Anxiety Master website as well. Take care. I'll see you soon.